I'm now going to hand over to Tara, who is going to share with you some slides, and Karen and Tara will be presenting for the next 45 minutes, and then we will run questions and answers. So Tara, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Purusha. It's great to be with you all today. And Karen and I are really excited and a little bit overwhelmed by how many of you have come, but we're very much looking forward to sharing with you some insights that we have on how you might be able to help your children and help yourselves during this really difficult time.
And so today what we will be covering is thinking about understanding your own position as a parent. We know that there are therapists watching here as well as other professionals, but this is actually valid for everybody, putting your own oxygen mask on first. Also, what are your children experiencing at the moment? And how you can help yourself and your child at the same time.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by looking a little bit at what you might be experiencing right now. We're going to be looking at this through a lens of the nervous system. We're all quite familiar with reactions that happen within our emotional part of our brain. It's sort of part of common language now, talking about fight, flight, freeze responses. But there's a really fantastic practitioner called Lisa Dion who has come up with understanding how the brain perceives threat and how we respond to it. And she's identified 4 priorities which the brain uses to assess whether or not we need to react. And we wanted to take these to share these with you because they're incredibly relevant for today. We're learning more and more that our autonomic nervous system is designed to assess whether or not there is threat, and it's happening, it's working all the time. And what it's doing is looking out for where the threat's coming from, whether we need to protect ourselves. And in the day-to-day, it's incredibly useful. And it does that really by, in a micro-assessing, assessing 4 priorities, 4 sort of priorities of threat. And we wanted to share those with you today because I think that they will speak a lot to the questions you might have about why you feel that you're not reacting in a way that you would normally with your family and with your children. So the first priority that Lisa talks about is the physical threat. And quite obviously, currently, our physical safety is under threat. And the thing that's very interesting about this at the moment in terms of what's happening in the population is that if we talk to friends and family, a lot of them will be saying, I'm all right, I'm not worried about getting sick, or my kids don't really get sick, so I'm not really worried about that. But we're going to enormous lengths all the time to keep ourselves safe, which is jarring with that story that we're telling ourselves, that we're not under physical threat. We're washing our hands, we are washing our shopping, we're staying away from people, we're staying home. And that is sort of in conflict with how we're sort of what we're telling ourselves. And we know that because I myself have this story of I'm okay and I'm not so worried, and yet I go into a Tesco and someone comes within 2 meters of me, I can feel my body react to that. So I kind of have this threat response of, whoa, you need to stay away from me. Obviously try not to say it, but in my head. And so that really tells me that this physical piece is very much alive. The second priority is is what Lisa calls the unknown. And the unknown is fascinating because we deal with the unknown pretty well in normal life. So the unknowns that we sort of are great in normal life because that's where creativity comes out of, that's where dealing with challenge comes out of. But at the moment, we are living in a complete unknown, and it's an untested unknown. And what happens when we have to deal with things that we don't know how to fix them is that we start to, in many cases, tell stories. So we start to go into a sort of catastrophizing behavior about it. And some of the stories that parents are sort of telling themselves or having to deal with at the moment are issues around children's schooling. So am I doing a good enough job? Worrying about your children's mental health, worrying about your own parenting. And then there are sort of the more macro pieces which are happening, like financial worries, or what will the world look like after this? And the problem is that in the current situation, when we're in lockdown, we don't have any processing time, because we typically deal with unknowns as parents when we're away from our children on a commute to school, or on a commute to work, or when you're walking the dog on your own. But all these unknowns are now bouncing off each other in the household. So you might be having into a sort of story about worrying about financial worries, and your child comes in and asks for a glass of milk, and those two things bounce off each other. So your response to what would typically be a very innocent and natural question is upregulated. It doesn't fit. And so then you go into a whole piece about, why did I fly off the handle? Because my kid asked for a glass of milk. And actually it's because we're dealing with the second threat response, according to Lisa Dion.
And something that I just want to add there, Tara, is we know with stories they help us make sense of our world. Yeah. And they also allow us to plan for the future. And at the moment, our future has been hindered by COVID-19. And I think at a very basic level, we're under threat, and it's about survival. Mm-hmm. And it explains, I think, partly why we catastrophize, why we dramatize, why we fantasize, why we embellish, because we're thinking about, or we're not thinking about, but it's about survival, it's about evolution, and it's about us as human beings.
Mm. Yeah. So with that in mind, we then have the third priority. So we've sort of dealt with physical, we're dealing with physical safety, we're dealing with the unknowns. What the brain does and the nervous system does in order to check for safety is it looks for patterns in the environment. So it looks for consistency. And at the moment, things are very inconsistent. They're what Lisa calls incongruent in the environment. So right now, there are so many changes in the patterns, that things that we were so used to dealing with, that it's causing us a real conflict in trying to find, we can't find patterns. Everyone's talking about the new normal, which is where we're at now, but we do know that's about to change again. And so looking for these patterns is it's causing us quite a lot of stress. And it's everywhere. So we think about, globally, countries are dealing with this differently. People, friends of ours who we used to trust their opinions of, have completely different opinions to ours. Obviously, there's the media situation where different media organizations are reporting in different ways. But I think the key one that links to this for our conversation tonight is the fact that in many cases, people are saying they're okay, but they're behaving in ways which say that they're not. And if we think about this for our children, this is having potentially, this is something that we need to watch, because kids know, kids have this, they're able to read, they rely on our faces, they rely on our psychology in order to help them. And so how parents manage being honest and open with their own worries and their own concerns, and yet presenting it to children in a sort of developmentally appropriate way, is something which we really need to consider. Because if we try and give our children the impression that there's nothing to worry about, and yet we're worrying, that's going to destabilize them even more. And then the last priority is unmet expectations. And the interesting thing about this is that the first three priorities, if you like, are external. So it's what's going on in the outside world. The fourth one is the I should. So this is the internal battle. I should be doing better with my, better job of parenting. I should be enjoying my kids being home. I shouldn't be getting cross with my partner. And these unmet expectations are things that we really use to sort of beat ourselves up with. And Lisa Dion goes even further, and she actually says that she feels that now is not the time to be calm. In other words, our bodies are working incredibly hard to manage these sort of threats that are coming in, these psychological and physiological threats that are coming in. And we're designed to deal with these sorts of stresses and what you might call trauma as one-off events. And this is going on, and we don't know when this is stopping. And so we're having to utilize all our neurological and sensory resources to deal with these four areas that we've discussed. And so trying to then put on top of that the expectation that I should be calm is asking a lot of ourselves. So really that's something to bear in mind.
I think also as well about expectations, just to add there, Tara, that I think it would be worth thinking about, who do these expectations belong to? Do they belong to you, or do they belong to another person with that voice in your head telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing? And it might be worth thinking about, whose voice is that?
Yeah, and you talk about that a little bit more later, about sort of considering that there are, you know, enormous, because we're all online, that's how we're communicating, and so there's an awful lot of information on what we should be doing in order to meet the needs of our children, and that's just putting a lot more pressure on ourselves right now. So just to finish off, thinking about where parents are at, Karen and I sort of looked at what are the sort of key things that parents are talking to us about at the moment. What are the key pieces that they're sharing with us that they're worried about? And one of the main pieces is, why can't I cope? Like, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just being a parent. I'm just being a carer, and I do that anyway. So why is this so difficult? Why can I do this for 8 long weeks or 6 long weeks in the summer holidays? And yet right now, this just feels endless and exhausting. Feeling like they're the worst parent in the world because they're not able to be all things to their child at all times, especially if you think your child is suffering at the moment. That just impounds the sense of guilt. And then the big one is, but I'm so lucky, other people have it so much worse than me. And so really sort of blaming yourself for not being ill or having kept your job, and thinking, you know, sort of doing that piece of, I've got no reason to be feeling bad. And we really hope that the 4 things that we've discussed before answer to some of those, that actually your body, your unconscious, your nervous system is dealing with this event that we've never had to deal with before. And so all of those pieces fit into that. And so we hope that by giving you a bit of understanding about what's actually going on for you, and normalizing this, that this is something that I'm experiencing, everyone is experiencing this, that you just don't give yourself such a hard time, really. The last 2, remote learning, is a biggie, especially parents finding it really hard to do, and then worrying that if they don't do it, their child will be left behind. And another biggie is, how do we know our children are okay? How do I know that the behaviours that I'm seeing, which I haven't seen maybe for 3 years, they're all coming up? What does that mean? And so those 2 pieces we're now going to look into in a bit more detail next, and I'm going to hand over to Karen to be looking at that.
Okay, so we're thinking about what your children are experiencing, and we know that they're experiencing many, many things. And what we also know is that child development doesn't stop because there's a pandemic, and that children's brains are still developing, and actually those neural pathways to the rational brain are not as strong as they will be as adults, and therefore they're reacting with their emotional brain. And that's what parents are seeing a lot more. Children are very, very emotional. And through our work, Tara and I discussed what are the key areas that we have noticed with reference to COVID-19. And I do want to emphasize this, that we are specifically looking at COVID-19 tonight, because we know that these areas can also be because of other difficulties that the child has experienced. However, if we look at regression, what is regression? Well, regression is that your child is behaving in a lot younger way in comparison to what they normally do. And we know that stress is actually a driver, and we know that often when children are under stress, they actually regress, and the regression is about showing their distress to you. And often it's because they're feeling overwhelmed, and there's no doubt that this is happening at this moment in time. And one of the things that you could do is actually to validate your child in this. But the regression is usually about them saying to you, I need some extra comfort at this point. I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that at all, Tara, in terms of regression.
I think that regression is a really interesting one because it can be quite troubling for parents, because it's fairly obvious, actually. You can sort of see that even adolescents can start displaying some really regressive behavior. And I think one of the pieces of advice that I always give to parents, if they do see that their child is acting much younger than their chronological age, is to actually sort of get ahead of the game, and at times perhaps invite to do things with your child that feel much younger, feel sillier. So for example, you know, if you have a sort of 7 or 8 year old who's climbing on your lap a lot, or who's asking to be rocked in a way that they weren't, then for you to get in there first and offer it will help them, because you're meeting that need, that sort of core need that they've got to be looked after, because there is a level of stress there. And so really they're going back and asking for you to do for them when they were much younger, because ultimately they're looking for safety.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think also that can happen to us as adults too.
Yeah.
Thinking about separation anxiety, children are being triggered by being separated from their parent, their carer. And this can manifest in many, many ways in the home. It can be that they're triggered by the fact that you've gone up to a room in the house and they're wondering where you are. It can be triggered by you going into the garden, going to work, and it can actually be triggered by you talking to somebody else. So what you may see is that your child is very, very needy, and when you do try and engage with somebody else, they're constantly wanting your attention. Here, similar to regression, you need to validate and recognize what your child's behavior, and perhaps trying to find some words to help them understand why they're behaving like that, and also to give them reassurance. And if you are going out of the home because you're going to work, or you're doing the shopping, or you're visiting you're going to the doctors, whatever that may be, it would be really important to let your child know where you're going, to try and reduce that separation anxiety. The other thing with separation anxiety, which is what we've noticed, is that there's a lot for children about death and also illness, and this seems to link to separation. They're fearful if their parent carer go out that they're going to die, or they're going to get ill and they're going to go into hospital and they're not going to return. So lots of reassurance is needed for your child.
And just very briefly to add that with regression and separation anxiety, the problem with those issues in our children is that they're actually quite annoying. They're quite triggering for us, because our piece is we've been with them all day. We're in the house all day, and I don't understand why my being here is causing them to be with me more. I can't give them any more attention than I'm already giving. And so I would really say that on both these points, you know, our suggestion of meeting their need and validation, but also bear in mind put the baby down if the baby's screaming and you feel filled up, you know, by being open and just saying, I just need a wee break and I'm going to come back, is very, very important, because both these areas are exhausting for parents, and it's quite a lot to handle.
And in terms of lethargy, and we're not talking about here children who are depressed, perhaps who are moving into needing to be assessed for mental health issues, but we are talking about general lethargy. So we're finding that children can't be bothered to do anything. They're not feeling very motivated. They feeling isolated and feeling that why get up, why do anything, because their world has changed, and they're feeling very, very fed up by all of these changes. And I'm just thinking about the work online with a lot of children. A lot of you are therapists here tonight, and I know for myself that I see that children are actually getting bored with this new experience of online working. So the world has changed for them, and we need to be thinking about how can we help them this way. And I would suggest that one of the things is that you perhaps need to look at your own expectations for this current situation, and maybe for them to just change whilst we're still in this period, because expectations linking to what Tara said previously about the I should. And as we know, that's not going to be helpful or healthy for anybody. Controlling behaviours, these can be many, and it's very much dependent on the age of the child. However, what you might find is that your child is trying to control you, trying to control everybody else in the household, and also trying to control all environments. The reality is that for children who are shown these controlling behaviours, what they're communicating is I feel emotionally and psychologically unsafe. And that's not necessarily anything that you've done, it's the current situation. And again, this goes back to what I keep repeating, we really want to recognise what your children why your children may be behaving as they are, and also to give them choices where you can. So to ensure that they have some control over situations that are appropriate. And the final thing that we've noticed, the biggie, is sleeping problems. Now, sleep problems are huge, and they are huge, I would think, for some of you adults as parents as well, therapists. I know sometimes I have sleep problems. But if we think about the current situation, routines are out of the window. Children haven't been able to go outside, so there's been a lack of exposure to daylight. And it's likely that there's a chemical imbalance with particular reference to the melatonin and the adenosine. What can you do about this? Certainly, what would be helpful is to get some structure in place and to get some routines. But in terms of the melatonin, there are two things that can help with the melatonin. One is actually to go outside and get some natural light. And the second thing is to reduce the amount of blue light your children are accessing. What do I mean by that? I mean televisions, phones, iPads, and so on. To help the adenosine, what we really need to be looking at is we need to be looking at the amount of caffeine that children are having. Now, we know caffeine is in tea and we know caffeine is in coffee, but there's a huge amount of caffeine in fizzy drinks. So if you're noticing that your children are drinking a lot more fizzy drinks, it just might be worth reducing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, we know that there are a lot of current tensions for parents, certainly needing to be connected with your child whilst having to maintain all other roles and duties. And this can feel really, really tough, especially when you're tired, and you can feel agitated when your child is needing the connection and you're exhausted and you just want to go to bed, or you just want to sit down and have something to eat. So it's a real pull for you. Children needing you more because of elevated levels of stress. Well, remember what I said earlier on about regression. So we know that stress is the driver and that de-stress is the behavior. For many of you, you may be put in a position of having to serve your communities more. You may be one of the only people in your community that are not in the at-risk groups. What does this mean for you? It's obviously individual. However, it could mean that you're checking on neighbours a lot more. It could mean that you're running errands. It could mean that you feel like a taxi service, going to the shops, getting extra shopping, getting medication. So it's incredibly difficult to say no at this time. The other thing is comparisons. We all compare ourselves. That's part of being a human being. However, it's not healthy at this point in time, because it's possible that you're comparing yourself to other family members, you're comparing yourself to parent friends, and you're comparing yourself to the community. And this links into the shoulds in terms of what Tara said earlier on. And also you might be comparing your children with each other. And that's going to cause a lot of friction between them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think probably most people have had this remote learning battle. There's no doubt about that. And there's always a question around, is there too much work? Is there not enough work? I know that a lot of children are being sent too much work and it seems endless. Equally, some children are not being sent enough work. And that's incredibly difficult when you have two children who are attending the same school and they're getting different levels of work sent home. It causes a huge conflict. Also, thinking about the lack of support, I have a question here. I wonder who has supported you in your role as a teacher, because this is something that you've had to step up to. And I'm imagining that most of you have had limited support. And it's not to say that schools aren't trying their best, but this is a role that you never envisaged that you would have. Also, who's prepared your child for this transition and actually the role change? It's very, very tricky. And when we think about the academic value and your relationship with your child, yes, it's really important that children are working to what's been set, but you have to perhaps ask yourself, is the battle around maths or English more important than your relationship with your child? You have to probably choose your battles at this point. And it's not to say that you want your child not to reach the levels, but you really have to think about how much of a rupture is going on in your relationship with your child in order for them to meet the assignments, to meet whatever's being set. Tara, I think that you've had quite a few conversations with parents about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, yes, many, and I think it's a very difficult one because it puts pressure on parents to have to decide whether or not they're going to be responsible, as they might see it, for their children not keeping up with the rest of the class in, say, you know, their maths or whatever it might be. And so there's that pressure, whilst you've got therapists like me saying, but it's all about the relationship, it's all about the relationship. So it's a really difficult balancing act. I think the only, and we can't advocate for not educating children, obviously we can't, but I think, you know, sorry, I'm stealing your next point, Karen, but looking at what does this mean for the future of my child? I mean, there is so much evidence that if children are feeling emotionally unsafe or feeling anxious or stressed, they're not going to learn. If you're feeling anxious and stressed, you're not going to be able to teach them. And the future of, you know, our children, we know from extensive research that quality of relationship, it will stand your children in good stead. That is the truth of it. So for me as a practitioner, I think that the parent-child relationship and giving yourself as much time as you need and really prioritizing and thinking about what learning needs, you know, not at the expense of the relationship, I would say is my advice. That's very important.
Sorry, Tara, I think there was a slight interruption in the connection just then.
Oh, okay.
I just want to sort of highlight the last point on the previous slide. What does this mean for the future of your child? Well, I think there are worries about your child's future in terms of their grades, and there's also worry about maybe their prospects. And going back to what Tara said, is we really need to think about putting, I would suggest, the relationship first. And I know that a lot of teachers are saying this as well, that the relationship is the most important thing, and that the academic part will follow.
Absolutely.
So if we think about connection versus COVID-19, we think about healthy development, and it is part of social connection and being together. Yet the messages that we've we have been told, absolutely, and the guidelines and what we've all been sticking to, is that physical distancing is a core concept of stopping the spread of COVID-19. These two aspects don't fit well for anybody. And the good thing, the good thing about this is that there is research coming through, and there's a research study that's been completed in Spain recently, and it was completed by the Miguel Hernández University. And what they were looking at is they were looking at the psychological impact of COVID-19 on children's emotional and psychological changes. They interviewed 2,000 parents, and there were two interesting results that came out of that research. The first was that children who actually used an outside space were more able to deal with the crisis. And the second was that if parents were able to communicate in a non-scary way about COVID-19, the facts, answering questions for children, then actually how they received it and internalized it meant they felt safer in this world in comparison to those parents who were perhaps conveying about COVID-19 through the lens of anxiety.
Okay, so thinking about where we're all at the moment, and obviously the first sort of piece of looking at the 4 threats, they also affect our children as well, because we're human beings too. So we know that there's an awful lot of stuff going on, and really what Karen and I wanted to do in this sort of brief time we've got today was think about a resource that we could share with you so that you hopefully could embed that as part of your day. We really didn't want to give you another thing to do. I know that when this whole thing started, I was madly preparing, you know, routines for my parents, and it was just not possible. Things were just too up in the air to start putting in a whole sort of structure and system. Some parents have been able to do that, which is great, but many haven't, because it was just unrealistic expectation of me to start structuring home life like a school day. So what we did was we thought that the zones of regulation would be quite a useful piece to share with you. And it's important for me to note that this is actually a curriculum, quite a developed curriculum that is typically taught in schools. So I'm really going to be going through it with you in a sort of nutshell form, but actually pieces from this we could use and use at home to regulate yourselves and regulate your children at the same time.
And I think also, Tara, as well, to regulate relationships in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why the zones of regulation we thought would be, you know, quite a useful one to introduce you to is because it can be used as a family regulation tool. It gains insight into how your children are feeling and where they're at. It also gives children a language for being able to identify how they're feeling in the moment, how they want to feel, and where they want to get to. And it's just something that we can start to use in our language at home. So there are 4 zones, as we can see here. And the green zone is the kind of optimal zone. That's where children learn best. They learn in the green zone. The other zones, it's very difficult to get them to sit down, as Karen explained, because of the way the brain is formulated. So they need to be learn ready and calm. Yellow zone is sort of more the upregulated piece, and this can switch between feeling excited or feeling frustrated or just wiggly in your body or anxious. And then we've got the red zone, which is really where, you know, sort of all reason has left the building and feeling very out of control. And this is for adults as well as children. This is the point at which we sort of shout or we bite back, or we can't get any sort of logical response from our kids. And then the blue zone, which is at the other end of the spectrum, is the very down piece. And so this is sort of tiredness or sadness or boredom. But also this is also where we need to get to help children get to sleep as well. So we want to look at this zones of regulation. And the great thing about it is that there are no bad points. You can't be in a bad zone. It's really important to remember that different people in different households will be at different zones all at the same time for different reasons. And so that also gives children the experience that I can feel this way and someone else might feel that way. So it's sort of helping with that piece. We know that parents can't change the way children feel, but we can help them to manage their feelings. And so by introducing this sort of common emotional language, it's a really good way and useful way of doing that. And finally, just noticing with children that they can be in more than one zone at the same time, so they can feel sad and angry. And certainly in our work with younger children, it's very difficult for children to identify how they're feeling. But by giving sort of colours like that, sort of giving them a sort of language of colour, it sort of helps them to be able to articulate where they're at. So by ways of you sort of supporting this within your own families, we would suggest that you identify your feelings using the zones language. So I'm frustrated, I'm in the yellow zone. So you can actually start to model it, because that's how our children learn a lot, is by modeling from us. So if you start to use it in this way, and there's obviously no expectation you're going to do this all the time because you'll drive yourself mad, but by just using it as and when you remember, that provides good modeling. Providing positive reinforcement when your child is in the green zone. So, you know, I noticed that you're working really hard to stay there, even when your brother's driving you mad or really irritating you. So that's, you know, good job, really proud of you type thing. And talking about what tools you're going to use to get back into a zone. So I need to go for a walk. So it's this thing about putting the baby down, as we discussed before. So, you know, I need to go out for 5 minutes, I need to get myself back into the green zone. Again, that's modeling the fact that you have some ability to regulate yourself. Look at what zones your children are in the day, and also teach them that they can use these zones in order to get to a place they want to be. So let's read a book before bedtime, and then we might, you know, we'll get you into the blue zone and ready for bed. So those are some examples, and I know that Parusha is going to share the PowerPoint via email, so you can sort of take this and use this from there. There are a couple of games that we thought about that could support zones of regulation. One really easy one is if you're watching a family movie, or you're reading a bedtime story, or your kids are playing games on the computer games, is just to get them to guess what zones the characters are in, and might name some strategies that they're using to move between zones. So you can just do that. And if you're feeling particularly energetic and able to, then you could always do a sort of zone charades by acting out characters, and the kids have to guess, or you have to guess, who the character is and what zone they're in when you're acting them out. So this feels like quite a sort of comprehensive and usable piece that can just be embedded into your everyday language. We also wanted to invite you to really think about your day. So we've looked at what you might be experiencing, what your children might be experiencing, and this goes back to the oxygen mask piece. So thinking about your day, we really invite you to first of all kind of do a sort of self-check. So thinking about, you know, a body scan. Are you feeling exhausted? Are you feeling really up? And then also a sort of personal regulation assessment. So you could use zone language or not, because it's all in your own head, but just thinking about where you're at, because that's going to then influence what your day is going to be like. And I think that we've kind of become on autopilot now, where we are sort of, it's the same day, it's like Groundhog Day, we're doing the same thing over and over again. And actually we need to notice where we're at, because that will really inform A, whether or not you are going to embark on that maths lesson this morning, and B, it just helps you to notice yourself and notice, you know, where you're at with this whole piece that's going on.
I mean, I think we're really talking about here, isn't it, is mindfulness, and actually being as present as you can be, and actually to really recognize how you're feeling, how your body's working, and what you can cope with at that moment in time.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you've sort of thought about that, to give yourself some structure. So there's no point trying to structure our children if we're feeling unstructured. And that structure can be very, very brief. It could be a decision over, right, I'm going to try and achieve this piece today. And then being proud of the fact that you've managed to do it. I mean, I know I was saying to Karen earlier that I've had a pile of paperwork on my desk, and I'm normally completely religious about doing my paperwork, and it's been there for 9 weeks, and I feel very proud because I managed to do it today. So there's all of that going on for all of us. And we also want to end with just suggesting that you give yourself a gift every day. And what we mean by that is just give yourself, you know, hopefully you've finally got the kids to bed. Just think about, what can I do for me? Is it a bath? Is it light a candle? Is it read that chapter of that book? And just to really think about during your day what you're going to do for yourself that is rewarding and makes yourself feel good. Because we need to be looking after ourselves right now.
I mean, it could even be things like listening to music that you love. It could be things like when you're able to purchasing some really nice coffee for yourself and a coffee mug specifically for you, and having a cup of coffee out of that mug every day. It could be some tea that you like. It could be some oil or bubble bath that you like. So we're not talking about huge gifts. We're really talking about the message, you matter, and it's important for you to nurture yourself.
Yeah. So when we've sort of looked at your day, we then start thinking about your kids, and it's useful for it to start off in the same way. So just doing a little regulation assessment in the morning, you know, where is your child at? What zone are they in, or what message are they giving you? And again, that can then inform what expectations you have on them. And we really recommend, if you think about how the school day starts, children start typically, if they're able to get there on time, by having a run around the playground. And this is not only because they need to have some fun, but it also gets their body sort of expels energy out of their body so that they can be ready to learn. And we recognize that not everybody has outdoor space. So that can happen, you know, within wherever it is, whatever available space that you've got. And Karen's going to be looking at some sensory activities that might be useful in this to just help your children get rid of whatever they're holding in their body. So you've done those pieces, and then you know what kind of remote learning you can expect from you and your child. And again, no shame attached to this. This is where you're at. This is what you can achieve in that day. We know from the Spanish study that getting your kids out, if you can, as much as possible, really does appear to be protective. So we would recommend that as much as possible. And we've also added in here 10 minutes of connection. And you're spending all day with your children, and then you've got us two saying to you, and you need to spend 10 minutes connecting with them. But actually what's happening right now is that we are not necessarily, I'm sure many of you are, but actually giving over some time to really focus on perhaps doing what they might want to do, reading their favorite story, having a bit of Lego, whatever it might be, so that you're giving yourself to your child in that moment, and you're actually for that time able to put aside all the other stuff that's buzzing away. And we're recommending 10 minutes because that's a lot in the moment, and that is absolutely ample in terms of this sort of relationship piece that we're talking about. And some of you might have, you know, 2, 3, 4 children. So 10 minutes is plenty. And again, if you don't achieve it every day, great. But we just want to give you the message that little and intentional is the driving force here. So don't feel like you know, if you feel exhausted, you need to be available and playing with your kids for hours, because that piece really thought about is going to make a big difference to their world.
And when you're coming to the 10 minutes connection, it's really important for you to be in the green zone, I would suggest. Yeah. Because if you're not in the green zone, if we're looking at the zones of regulation, if you're not in the green zone and you decide that now is the 10 minutes that I'm going to have with my child, what potentially you're going to do is more harm than good. It's going to possibly rupture the experience. It's not going to be an enjoyable experience for your child and for you, actually. And then what will happen is neither of you will want to have 10 minutes together because it's too difficult and too hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we decided to think about some sensory activities that we could put up for you, which would incorporate all aspects of the body. And the reason we've done that, because as Tara has said earlier on, is we really need for your body, your children's body, to get moving, because if it's not moving and it gets trapped within itself, it can increase the fight-flight response. So the body moving is a really important part of all of this presentation. The other aspect is that we know, if we parallel it across to schools, is that there are many children who have sensory breaks. And sensory breaks are put into school because the child is losing concentration, is becoming dysregulated, so perhaps has a lot of energy, or maybe is withdrawing, so actually needs to change their body experience. And we know that if you engage in sensory activities, it's actually going to change the energy of your body. And generally speaking, it will start to calm the emotions. So the ones we thought about were a bear hug. So giving your child a bear hug, whether it's hard pressure or light pressure, that can be really, really containing for a child. Pushing yourself into the floor, a wheelbarrow walk, and swinging and rocking. We'd really encourage you, if your child comes and sits on your lap, no matter their age, then maybe just to rock them very, very gently, whether it's side to side, back and forth. But it's a very, very calming experience. And if you have an adolescent child who wants to come and sit alongside you, it's probably going to be quite difficult to swing them. However, what would be wonderful is if they come and cuddle up to you and you just gently give them some sensitive and loving strokes. Wall push-ups, sucking smoothies through a straw, and the best straw, if you can get it, actually is one of those curly whirly straws, because it makes it a little bit more difficult for the child, and actually that helps with the sensory integration. Also chewing food, so we've put bread here, but other things would be really, really strong mints that the child can suck on, and also very, very sour sweets that the child can suck on, or your child can suck on. Blowing bubbles, if you haven't got bubbles, then make them, washing up liquid in a bowl of water, using your hands to blow. Bouncing, children like to bounce. Of course, you have to be careful of safety here, but whether they're bouncing on a trampoline, bouncing on cushions, bouncing on the sofa, bouncing on the bed, I'm not advocating that, but children do like to bounce. And blanket roll, and Tara and I have spoken a lot about this, and this is one of our favourite activities. So having a blanket for the child and rolling your child into the blanket, and then getting the end and pulling the child out. And it can be really, really joyful, because it also links into peekaboo as well. Your child was hidden and now they've been found. So that can be a sensory activity, and it also can be a connecting activity. But we're not saying that you should be using these activities for the 10 minutes connection. It's more that if you see that your child needs to move and needs to actually release some of the energy in their body, or change the energy in their body. So as much as they perhaps need to increase their energy, they also need to reduce their energy. So it could be either of those, and the sensory activities will help that.
And I think the other thing to notice here is that a lot of these activities that we've recommended will meet regression needs. So sort of swinging and rocking, sucking through a straw, bear hugs, all those, and the blanket. I mean, all of these actually will meet regressive children who are demonstrating regressive behaviour, but it's done through a sort of playful way, so it won't feel unusual to them. It can sort of meet that part of what's going on for them as well.
Okay, so I just want to go back to just the thinking about what we started off with, which was the oxygen mask. And when on flights, if there's an emergency situation, what happens is there's a request that you put your own oxygen mask on first before you put your child's oxygen mask on. Why? because if you're unconscious, you're not going to be any good to anybody. So if we parallel this across to what we're saying here, is that you need to look after yourselves in this. You need to put your oxygen mask on first. And then once you've done that, then actually you can care for your child in a much healthier way in this very, very difficult time.
Yeah.
The other point that I'd like to highlight is that an important buffer for all of us in times of stress is actually social connectedness. And this is very tricky at the moment because obviously with the physical distancing, but there is no reason why we can't have emotional connectedness. And that can be through our body language, that can be through our facial cues, and that also can be through our tone of voice.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much. We've come to the end now. I'm going to hand over back to Purusha, who's going to, I think, field some questions that may have come through from you to us. As I said, she's going to be sharing out the PowerPoint, but if you had any sort of questions for us which you might not want to share in this forum, or wanted to get in touch with us for any reason, these are our various websites. So from obviously training, that's our company together, PIP Solutions, but if you wanted to get in touch with either of us for something sort of more therapeutic or personal, then please do so through our websites. So thank you very much. I'm now going to stop the PowerPoint and hand back to Purusha.
Wow, Tara and Karen, thank you very, very much indeed. I think there is an awful lot there that you shared with us that many parents, myself included, can really, really relate to. So thank you for sharing all of that, and I'm sure there are many takeaways for lots of people. I'm conscious that some people may need to leave, so please do feel free to drop off as is necessary while we just move to questions. We are recording this event, so we will be emailing you in 2 days' time once we've edited it. We will be sharing the PowerPoints that Tara and Karen have shared with you today. And I know many of you have requested some of the links, so we will get hold of those as well to some of the research that was talked about. And we will make sure that all of that is included in the follow-up email that we send to you. Please do feel free to share on the link to the video if you feel that there is anybody else that you may know that may also benefit from this session. Karen and Tara will be coming back on the 11th of June, and we are going to run a poll very shortly after Q&A just to see what you would actually like to hear about. But we have got some questions that have come in the meantime. So I'm just going to kick off first of all with those. And early on, you talked about this regression behaviour that we are seeing in children, and I've experienced this too with my own children. You talked about some ways, some sensory activities that we could do with children. Is it wrong to give children comfort in the way that they are asking for it, or should we be preempting it and be moving to those activities before that they ask for it?
Do you want to take this one, or shall I?
Do you want to?
I'll go for it.
And then I'll add to it because there are a few things as well.
The first thing I would say is that regressive behaviours are a very clear message from children that they are needing more. And as Karen said, it really isn't very unusual, and it's quite alarming for parents because you sort of feel like your child is going backwards. They're not. They're just giving you a message without necessarily having the language or even knowing it themselves that they need more support at the moment. So your question was, should we be preempting it or should we be doing what they ask? And I would say you need to, if where possible, do a bit of both. So, we don't necessarily want the sort of regressive requests to start making you feel uncomfortable or make you feel like you are sort of having to jump to the dance of your child at every moment. But I think that right now regression is happening to the vast majority of kids, I'd say, in one way or another. And so we need to respond to that as much as possible. And if we can preempt that by, you know, if you have as I said, if you have a sort of 9-year-old who is suddenly sort of started asking to sort of climb on your lap, or wanting a piggyback, or, you know, behaving in ways that do feel much younger, then by offering a piggyback first, or, you know, hauling your child onto your lap, then that's really giving them the message of it's okay, I've got you. And what we really want at that point is for the child to go, oh, get off. And then we know that they're doing okay, fundamentally. So I would say preempt, respond to, but only as much as it makes you feel comfortable, because if it's making you feel uncomfortable, then the child's going to pick that up anyway. So
the thing that I would add to it is that regression is not going to be a continuous behavior.
Yeah.
And there may be moments where your child is regressed, and as Tara says, you know, we would encourage you to respond to that, but it's not going to be lasting forever. We're just seeing this more with the crisis that's going on, because children are just feeling, as adults are feeling, overwhelmed and feeling very, very stressed, and they're going to comfort, and where they get if you like, the more tender comfort. And what I mean by that is the cuddles and the cooing and all of those things, is as when they go back to those younger experiences at younger ages.
Mm.
And what about adolescents and teenagers? Some people are talking here on the chat to say that there's more requests coming for PlayStation and Xbox time. And obviously you talked earlier about all of our children are overloaded with screens. Their lessons are delivered by screens. There's lots of kind of talks, webinars, and more TV time. There's box sets of galore, and Netflix are sort of pumping out enormous amounts of things for us to watch. What sensory activities or connection pieces could you perhaps do with some of the older age group children? Could you look at some cooking classes, or what kind of things could parents of older children look at?
Do you want me to take that, Tara?
Yeah, go for it.
I think the first thing to say is that it is important that children are using social media, because it actually is the way that they're connecting to their friends and to still feel that they're part of societies and the community. So I think that's really important to say that, but it needs to be structured. But in terms of games with children, I would suggest that there's things like drawing you could do. There's something called the squiggle, and we can certainly write that down for you, and we can give that to you. Cooking, listening to music. As a parent, perhaps asking your child, you know, why do you like this music? What is it about this band that you like? Tell me about, if you were in the band, who would you be? So you could be curious about their interests. Perhaps trying to encourage them to actually have an interest, a new interest. I'm thinking of gardening, perhaps. I'm thinking, you know, there are lots of different things within the family home that that you can use in order to get creative with your children. I mean, if you've got spare material, you could cut that up and make things. So many things.
I think in terms of the sort of physical sensory stuff, it's very difficult, because I think, you know, there's lethargy amongst many of us, children, adolescents and adults. I think that adolescents tend to be quite lethargic anyway. What is really happening now is that the sleep thing is going completely bonkers, because unless they're in, if, you know, particularly for kids in sort of year 11 where school finished ages ago, it's very difficult for them to have any sort of structure to their days. So they're really becoming later and later and later, and almost living sort of parallel lives to everyone else in the house. And I think that really this has to come from a sort of a place of what is my value on this? And, you know, I think some parents feel incredibly uncomfortable about their young people playing games all the time, completely understandably. It's important to find out whether or not they're playing games on their own or they're playing games with friends, because nowadays, most kids, that's actually how they're communicating, is that they're going to battle with loads of mates on the same game. So that is a sort of communication tool. But it comes back to, as much as possible, the most important structural piece is to get them outside, in whatever way that looks like, whether it's sending them to the shops to go and get something, you know, walk to the shops, or, you know, I don't know, offering to play a game of football. God forbid my teenagers ask me to do that, but, you know, just something like that, because if we can get them outside, we can get the daylight, we can sort out the melatonin, but it is a really tricky one. So it comes back to the value system of the parents. I'm certainly not going to say that we should hamper kids being online at the moment, because quite frankly, what have they got? So it needs to be structured, it needs to be monitored, but it's a toughie.
I think
Yeah, so, sorry, Karen.
Say with the connection with the adolescents, it could be things like painting nails, it could be a hand massage, it could be things like making a bracelet, making a necklace. Those are the things really we're talking about. For all children, it's really, really nice, I think, when you as a parent are doing things to actually give your child a narrative of your own childhood, if that's appropriate. So for example, if you're combing your child's hair, to tell them what that was like when your hair was combed as a child, if it's appropriate and it was comfortable. It's those sorts of things that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I've been a sort of great advocate for that. A lot of lessons in life sit outside of the classroom, and I think there's a real worry that parents, as you spoke earlier, have been really concerned about, well, what if my child misses this maths lesson or this English lesson? Are they going to fall behind? And the reality is that we're perhaps looking at maybe 8 weeks of their entire life of this window of education, but we as parents have a real opportunity to actually give them some of those life lessons by actually having time with them while they're actually at home. And I think, to add to your point about being outside and being in nature, we have been blessed with such incredible weather since this pandemic started, that I've been speaking to people over the last few days, and, you know, people have got out their power tools and they've got their children helping them make decking. And, you know, I've taught mine to make beds and empty the dishwasher in the hope of COVID. There's some of these life lessons will stand in good stead later on. So I think you're absolutely right there. I just wanted to follow up on the sleep topic that you talked about. We did actually run a webinar with a lady called Dr. Sophie Bostock, who is a sleep scientist, and we ran this 2 weeks ago. The recording of that is available on our platform. So if you go to the Zest Global Events website and then click on the Motivation in Isolation page, you will then see a button which sends you through to the Vimeo page, which has the link of all of the videos of all the previous sessions we have run. So if any of you are really concerned and would like to know more about sleep and some really practical solutions, she does talk for about 40 minutes around the topic of sleep there. We've got a couple more questions probably before we come to a close, because I'm conscious that we all need to go to sleep, and if we've got too much blue light, we're not going to be able to sleep this evening. So, but I think they are really, really important questions. So if I may steal a little bit more of your time, I think it would be great to ask. The return to school.
Yes.
People are worried about this already. Is it going to happen before the summer holidays? Is it going to happen in September? And what's it going to look like when we get back there? So we already know that class sizes are going to be smaller. We know that there may be protective equipment that teachers may be wearing, and our children are going to be arriving back to school in a very different environment to the one that they left. And we all know how important that nurturing school environment is. So what would be your advice to parents to how do we prepare our children for that return to school, and the fact that it may look very different to the world that they left back in March?
Well, for me, I think it goes back to the study, the excuse me, the study in Spain, that they said that one of the findings is that parents talking to their children appropriately, not making COVID-19 scary, meant that children were able to experience the world in a very different way. And I think that parallels what you're saying, Purusha, in terms of it's about speaking to your child, preparing your child. Maybe I said to a parent the other day, because their child is probably going to be a school refuser, is actually maybe, when appropriate, actually going to the school, driving to the school, doing the school walk, and so on and so on. So I think preparation is the key to this, and being honest.
Yeah, I think honesty is huge. And I know for some parents this is happening on Monday, right? And for some parents, they've got kids in year 6 who might be going back, and then children in, say, year 3 and 4 who aren't going back. So this is a big minefield. But I think that Karen's right. There's definitely the preparation piece. I think there's honesty about, we as parents ideally are certain, and we're able to give our children certain truths. At the moment, we can't do that, but what we can do is share with them that it's going to feel a bit funny, and it's going to feel a bit different, and we're going to have to learn new ways to do. And I think, as Karen said, the practice and the preparation beforehand is a great idea. And, there's so much pressure on schools at the moment that I certainly don't want to give them any more work to do. But I think finding information out, like, are they going to be with their friends in class? Who their teacher's going to be, and I think, all of that. So just by preparing them as much as possible, but in sort of very simple language, and sharing what you know and what you don't know.
I think the other thing as well is that emphasizing the fact that adults are there the adults in the school want to keep them safe. And although it feels unsafe at the moment with what's going on, but adults in school do want to keep them safe, and to keep emphasizing that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really interesting what you were saying about the language and the access that our children have. I mean, I personally, I don't have the radio, I don't have the TV, I don't have any news available for my children to listen to, because I feel that it's just compounding this kind of negative issue. They already know that they're not allowed to see their friends because of COVID-19, the coronavirus, and they can't go to school. And so it's already sort of perpetuating this this negative spin. So I've sort of taken them away from that. So I think that's a really encouraging point. And also very encouraged that Boris Johnson today has said from Monday, gatherings of 6 people will be outside. So not only does that support your research, which says getting outside, but hopefully that some people will actually now be able to go and meet up with others, and maybe they could go on nature walks, or they could maybe take some of those PE lessons and go to a local park, something like that, and meet up with other children to really start getting that face-to-face social engagement piece back again.
I mean, I think for some children it is going to be baby steps, because they will have been away from school for such a long time. And we go back to the priority 2 with Lisa Dion, which Tara was talking about, is the unknown. So there's going to be a lot of unknown in this, and there's going to be a lot of stories that are being created around this. And it's about guiding your child slowly reintegrating them back into school. But I don't think anybody pretends that this is going to be easy.
No. And just to chuck in a last sort of can of worms, of course, is there are some children who are thriving from not being at school. And that's another big issue, which we just don't have time to get into now, but it's certainly one for consideration, because actually for some children and some adults, they're in their happy place right now. And so that's another piece that needs to be looked at, of how to get them out of the house, because they might be really enjoying the time with their family and not having the pressure of school and so on and so forth. So it's a biggie. It's a big piece.
Absolutely. I've got a comment that's come in on the chat here to say that there's a Dr. Barry Carpenter who's creating a recovery curriculum about how schools can support the mental health and well-being of children when they return to schools. So we'll perhaps have a look at that, and if we think that's really valuable research, then again
I'll write that down later.
Yeah, well, I've got a copy. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. So we'll have a look at that for you. I know there's been a couple of questions from people about how do you support individual children or children that are perhaps solo parent and only child, and any children perhaps with behavioural challenges such as ADHD. And maybe, I don't know whether you can very briefly touch on that just before we come to a close, as to ways that parents can support those children with those particular needs in this current situation.
Well, I think that, I mean, it feels like I'm going to do a very blanket job if I do that in summary very, very quickly. When I was thinking about how on earth am I going to answer that question in 2.5 seconds, I just thought, you know, for me, there is definitely a physical element. And I think it goes back to expectations, what you can expect, what has worked for the child in school in terms of helping the child regulate, you know, what's been done in school if they've got a diagnosis, then they may have support in school, and what's that support done to help the child, and is there any way of then replicating that at home? But that's a really big question. But my go-to is look at what's worked outside of the home environment. Can it be brought into the home environment? And you know, getting, again, I sound like a broken record, but getting outside.
Yeah. I think there's also something about going back to basics.
Yeah.
Going right back to basics and just thinking about your child perhaps being, when they were born, being a baby, and maybe just thinking about, yes, definitely those sensory elements, but to hold, to hug, to do those really, really tender things that you may well have done when they were younger.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's that regression piece again, isn't it? I think we all need hugs. I'm going to hug
everybody.
I'm allowed to. So, as I mentioned, Tara and Karen are coming back on the 11th of June at 8 o'clock for another Parents' Hour. And we would love to hear from you as to what you would like them to talk about. So I've just popped a little poll up on your screen. So if you can just have a vote and let us know, you can pick a couple if you'd like to. Let us know, what would you like Tara and Karen to come back and talk about on the 11th of June at 8 o'clock. And they will write the content over the next week or so, and we will bring it back to you. You can already sign up for this session. Where you signed up today in the Eventbrite, on the Eventbrite page, there is already a link there for their next session on the 11th of June. Obviously, it hasn't got the detail behind it because we don't know what you want to hear about yet, but we will once we know today, we will then pop that up. So great, I think we've got 68% voted, so I'll just give it another 10 seconds just so that everybody can have their say. And it may be that we might have to run a couple, because it's looking like it's pretty neck and neck between your nervous system regulating your child and supporting children's controlling behaviours. Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you so many people for voting. 87% of you have voted. So I'm just going to end that now, and then I'm going to share the results. So Karen and Tara, the 60% engaging your nervous system and regulating your child is the topic that most people like to hear about, followed very close behind by supporting children's controlling behaviours with 59%. So we will most definitely take a note of that, and we will put together something for you. In terms of supporting parents' well-being, we are doing another Parents' Hour 8 o'clock next Thursday with the wonderful Claire Traherne, who is going to be talking to you as parents and how you can support your own well-being through this really tricky time. Claire has been, she's already run a few sessions for us on the Motivation in Isolation platform around the growth mindset, and she has been on this call today, and she will be making sure that everything that she is talking about really supports everything that Tara and Karen have shared with you today. For those of you that would like to do some activities with your children, we have got a chocolate making class tomorrow at lunchtime. It's Fun Friday, so 1 o'clock tomorrow. If you want to learn how to make chocolates, Friday half term, ready for packaging up some gifts that you're going to take to all those people that you're going to visit from Monday onwards, when we're allowed to go and see 6 other people. Do come and join us tomorrow. And we've also got a breathwork session. We've got some business improvement workshops and, as I mentioned, some other wellbeing events coming up. So please do check back on the Eventbrite page. As I mentioned, all of the slides from today, including the zones of regulation, which I know many of you have asked about, those will be shared with you. We will be sending you an email with the links from any research that we think you'll find useful, copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and a recording of this video, so you will be able to watch this again if you perhaps joined halfway through. So you will be able to catch up on demand as well. So I'd just like to say a very, very big thank you to both Tara and Karen for coming and joining us this evening, and a big thank you to everybody who has come to listen to everything that they have had to share with us. I know it's very difficult times that we're in at the moment, and hopefully we are starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you all very, very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing, hopefully, most of you again in a couple of weeks' time. And if you feel that there's anybody else that would benefit from joining these events or any of the other wellbeing events that we are running or have run, they are all free and they are all here to support you during this time of isolation. So please do share it far and wide. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.